All right, now we're moving right into our town hall gathering. Thank you again for being with us in person. Here's what we're online. We've got a few people actually here in person, so we're going to be able to field at least a couple of questions from people here in person. But you'll note on your screen and at the end of your order of service a number where you can text questions right now. And we've already received throughout the week questions from many of you, so thank you for doing that. We're going to spend about 15 minutes, several of us, going through some of the information that we want to share with you about this incredible opportunity. And then we'll have about 15 minutes where we're fielding questions that you are sending in. Let me introduce to you two that will be joining me this morning. David Steinbach is an elder here at City Church and is a member of our financial oversight team, as well as our real estate team. Thank you, David. And Valerie Thompson, who is our executive director, an elder, and on both of those teams as well. So we've all walked this process through from beginning to where it is at this point. Let me begin by just talking a little bit about the opportunity before us. I do think it is an extraordinary opportunity that we have to consider. The team, the real estate team, has been searching for the better part of 6 years, almost since the very beginning of City Church. We have looked at numerous properties. There have been a couple of properties actually in that time period where we have spent a great deal of time. It looked like two of them might materialize. They did not end up materializing. And so finally, we entered into a discussion about 15 months ago with Bethany Christian Church here in Houston at 3223 Westheimer. They had come to the point where they were looking for a shared space arrangement with another church, considering it. And we entered into that conversation with them. We came to the conclusion, both churches came to a preliminary conclusion that the best arrangement was for City Church to acquire the property. And I just want to say right up front how incredibly humbled that we are by the leadership at Bethany Christian Church for their strategic priority to regard as greater importance to continue gospel ministry in that strategic location than simply viewing it as a real estate transaction. And we're very grateful for them. This last year has made being in a temporary facility for City Church all the more difficult. I couldn't be more grateful for our staff and lay leaders, the unsung heroes behind the scenes who have constantly, and today is no exception, pivoted to continue delivering City Church online and in various in-person gatherings like we have here at Axelrad. But we believe that now is the time for us to seize the opportunity that's before us, because so many of our ministry areas have faced constraints over the last 6 years. We'll talk about that in more detail in the upcoming time. But we believe that this kind of a central location in Houston, in a densely populated area, right on one of the most thoroughly trafficked streets in the city, gives us an opportunity to set our face toward the city in a fresh way, and to do so in a way that will be able to give us essentially a 24/7 ministry center. It's how I really want you to think about this space. It's not this insular space for people to come and go in the walls of the church and do church. It's really a way for the church to set its face toward the city and continue to do the same ministry that we've been doing, but now be able to do it far greater way because of the 24/7 ministry center that we will have. One of the things I wanted to do is bake into this preliminary time where I'm sharing with you a couple of questions that have already developed. I've visited with several of you this past week about the concern that this particular location might make it more difficult to be a church that's regarded as a safe place for persons of color. What's the reason for that? Well, City Church would be on 3223 Westheimer, right across Westheimer from River Oaks, a historically wealthy neighborhood that many persons of color would say historically has not been a friendly, welcoming space. And I just want to acknowledge that up front, that while I think this is an incredible opportunity we have, there's no perfect location. This location has before it so many opportunities, but this would be one of the challenges. And what I want to just pledge to you as the senior leader of City Church is that we will always be a church that prioritizes the need to be a safe place for persons of color, that we will continue to do the same kinds of things we've done, but now we'll need to be more intentional about it. And yes, while we will be across Westheimer from a neighborhood like River Oaks, we're also, the other street, east side, is across the street from Lamar High School. That is 70%, demographically, 70% non-white. We're going to have to work hard to reach those students and their families. But one of the things that we've already imagined doing is thinking of the space there in new ways. To have, for instance, a coffee house, perhaps a live music venue, a co-work space that would be right there on one of the most trafficked intersections in the city, a place to welcome people in and let them begin to feel the safety of the space for them. But we've got to work really, really hard at this. A couple other points that I think are interesting. A 5-mile radius of this location, 52% of the population is non-white. And when you consider all the high-density residential units that have been developed over the last 10 years or so in that area, high percentage, very young population, and also very diverse. Houston is an interesting city, as we all know, with very little in the way of zoning. So you have suburban and urban neighborhoods juxtaposed right next to one another. We believe that this location will give us an incredible opportunity to reach the entire city because it is so central and located in such a highly densely populated area. There's a lot more that we could say about that, but one of the things that we're going to do is create a task force, a team with persons of color on it to help us reimagine this space to ensure that it's consistent with our mission at City Church. Now, at this point, I want to welcome David. And again, this is David Steinbach, an elder, member of our financial oversight team and real estate team, also a real estate professional. David, share with us a little bit about what you're excited about with this property.
Sure. And before I do that, I want to echo something that you said, just really thanking all the people that worked on the real estate team. It has been a long journey. And I will tell you, this is honestly not where I necessarily thought we would end in terms of a recommendation to this congregation. When we started this journey, which really effectively began, as you said, when this church began, right? The day we began, we were thinking about where we needed to be, what that needed to look like. In my mind, I thought, okay, we'll just lease some industrial space and be done. And just easy, right? This will be an easy thing. Little did I know that years later, we'd still be working on this. And it's actually, when you start digging into the details and getting into, okay, how are we actually going to do that? What is it actually going to cost? You've got hundreds of people you're moving, and you've got code issues. You've got all these things that aren't necessarily intuitive. It starts to become a very difficult path. And as you said, it has been a long road, and we did look at a lot of things. And I want everyone that's thinking about this recommendation just to realize that, because that might not be self-evident. It's just how much of a journey this has been, and how many rocks that we tried to uncover, how many ideas we chased down, how many even negotiations we entered into, and it's tough. I mean, this is a competitive city in terms of real estate. So anyway, just big thanks to everybody on that journey. But I'm really excited about this opportunity because the way I think about real estate and the way I think about cities, it's a very interesting intersection, okay? And it's almost like an analogy of a tree, right? A tree is something that grows, and it grows in different directions, depends on how it's pruned, how it's shaped, right? And I think for all of us, as we're sitting here today, and we're thinking about the next 10 years, right, or 20 years, and we're thinking about what do we want this city to look like? How do we want to help be a part of the narrative to shape the direction of Houston? I think it's a very interesting analogy because being an actual stakeholder in the city, putting our stakes in deep, if you will, and actually owning land, if you will, in the city, in such a strategic location, I totally also agree with the comments you made. There's a lot of history here, right? And we can't ignore that. But I think as we look forward and think about the vision for the city that we have and how we want it to look, this is such an exciting opportunity to be able to help be a part of that narrative and create something that we're all excited about. And it's going to be a process, and it's sometimes hard in real estate to have the mindset that you need, which is very forward thinking, right? It's thinking about things a decade from now. But I think that this will end up being a huge contribution that all of us are going to make in an investment in the city, and it's exciting to be a part of that. So I'm super excited, and I just encourage everybody not to focus in on necessarily the past or focus in on what's there today, but just think forward about what we want it to be and have our minds fixated on that. And I think that's where you can get real excited about what this opportunity means. So
thanks, David. Will you talk a little bit now about the actual structure of the real estate deal? Sure.
Yeah, this is honestly an unbelievable opportunity. So my day job is real estate, and I work on real estate all around the world for a commercial company. And this opportunity is only possible due to the generosity and frankly the forward thinking of Bethany. They could go to market and sell this property today, I think, for $30 million. And I think that would be easily achievable. And what would happen is a developer would buy that property and tear everything down and probably build some apartments with some activated retail at the bottom, is exactly what they would do. And I think that property in 10 years is worth a lot more. I mean, this city is growing at a rapid pace, and it's interesting, even with COVID, how many people have moved into Houston and how many people are continuing to fight for real estate, right? So I think this property is easily $30 million today. Is it $40 million in 10 years? It's probably, frankly, even a little bit more than that. But the folks at Bethany were forward thinking to say, look, we know we could do that. So this is Bethany's perspective. We have this asset that we could go and sell it and frankly make a lot of money. And that would be the end of everything, of the ministry and what they wanted to do at the site. Instead, they engaged with us to think creatively, frankly, about how to keep ministry alive at this location. Because there's certain constraints that we have. We frankly cannot afford $30 million. That is just not possible, right? That's just not going to happen. And we were very honest with Bethany on that. Like, look, I mean, even though that would be the easiest thing to do in all cases, just pay you market, that's just not even possible. And so, again, thanks to the generosity of Bethany, we structured an agreement that I think gave our church a lot of time to grow. And I'm just going to quickly go into the math, and I know Valerie's going to talk a little bit about this as well. But the idea of the structure is we have no ability to pay this today. And so let's defer any payment for the future, which is what we did. So we said, look, in 12 years, effectively, we will come back to this and give you a full payment for the property. But we can't obviously afford the 30, and so we agreed to 10, which is obviously a third of what they could get. There was a desire on Bethany's part to honor their denomination and honor all of the things that went into the building of that church. And so they did ask for some form of payment as a way to honor all those things that led up to this moment. And that was where the $10 million came from. And when we pay that in 12 years, that will go to a charity that honors that denomination of the work that they did all those years. But until then, all we have to pay is, I would describe it, something equivalent to what our operating expenses are today anyway. And so this isn't going to be a significant jump for City Church in terms of our operating expenses. And so the way we crafted that, the structure of that is effectively it's interest payments, but I maybe consider it rent but it's really nothing more than obligations that we have today that we have for the next 12 years. And so in my mind, the way this is structured is City Church can keep, operating expenses stay where they are. We do have a payment in 12 years from now. But at that point, I think there's a lot of options that we have in 12 years. I think one option is simply to go to a bank, because the property is obviously going to be worth, I think, a lot more. It's worth more today, and simply refinance the property and get a loan for a third of the value, and our interest payments probably will go up a little bit, but I think not significantly. And again, this is 12 years from now, or by that time we raise the money to pay it off. But I think the bottom line is, in a complicated world of competitive real estate in Houston, we have flexibility, and I think that's the key. What philosophically we were focused on trying to create for the church.
Thanks, David. That's very helpful. Valerie Thompson, our executive director, tell us a little bit about why you think we need a permanent home.
Yeah, it's a question that has come up several times, and in my position as kind of the lead logistical staff member at City Church, my first instinct is to kind of think on all the things this could possibly solve, like all the setup issues, the takedown, the challenges in our children's ministry, even things like when we had our Tish Harrison Warren event this week. If we had wanted to do that in person over the years, we've thought about where can we do these kind of things. So my kind of logistical brain defaults to those things. But I do think that there is like a little more mission to this too, of having a permanent week, presence that's there throughout the week. And when I think on the things that Leo alluded to, like a coffee house, things that can get people through our door, that's when I get really excited about it. So, I mean, this is great logistically for the staff, but also it's way more missional, in my opinion.
Thanks, Valerie. You may be wondering what the timeline is. So both congregations have to approve this opportunity. And so both at Bethany and at City Church, similar events, they will have events like this. In fact, some of us will be participating at their invitation at Bethany's town hall gathering. And we also want to make ourselves available to meet individually with any of you who would like to, as we've done this past week already with some of you. So Bethany will vote on June 6th, and then we will have a congregational meeting at City Church after worship, an abbreviated worship service on June 13. Then we would enter into the perfecting of the legal contract itself and a time of due diligence. And during that time, we would be working with an architect. We've already begun that work to help us reimagine this space in a way that is absolutely consistent with our mission. And then once that renovation is done, then we would enter into Bethany as our new home. In the meantime, over the next year, we'll be at House of Blues. So we're going back to House of Blues effective June 6th. And that home that has been our space for the better part of 6 years will be there for the better part of the next year until Bethany is complete in terms of its renovation. Now, let me open it up at this point for some questions from you. And I'd like to first of all, Elise Miller is going to be helping field these questions. And we've also got a couple of individuals here that are going to ask questions. So Elise, would you ask our first question?
Sure. Thanks to everyone for sending in questions. We did get a number this week, so the questions that I'll be asking today have come from you. The first question is, I think there is a preschool operating there currently. What is the plan with the school when we take ownership of the property? Thanks,
Elise. Valerie, will you answer that one?
Sure. So there is a very beloved preschool that operates at Bethany Christian that we are really excited about having. The plan is for the preschool to stay operating as is. We have several members of our congregation whose kids have been there, and we view this as a great opportunity for City Church. So the school will continue, and it's our intention that the staff there continues as is. That has been talked about with Bethany, and we have told them that we will operate the school for 5 years. There's also a small music school there that is growing, and we will also allow that school to continue operating in the facility, and are excited about how that intersects with our vision with the arts.
Thanks, Valerie. And I know we have a question from someone who's here. Margaret?
Hello. Being that Bethany Christian is a more traditional church house compared to Axelrad, will that alter the dress code for church, or alter how we dress for church?
You know, that may sound like a fairly basic question, but I think it talks a lot about how we envision this space. Thank you, Margaret, for asking it. No, you don't have to wear your Sunday best to be at City Church once we move into Bethany. We don't want the vibe of City Church to change actually at all. And so that's why we want to spend a great deal of time, because someone said, well, why don't can we start meeting there, in a couple of Sundays? No. We want to make sure that we have been very careful about reimagining the space so that people who have felt comfortable coming to City Church all along, dressing down, are going to feel just as comfortable coming to City Church in this new central location. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
And I think we've got one other question here. Caleb?
The question is a little bit more financial. Generally, our operating budget is like $1.2 to $1.4 million a year. How are we going to be able to afford to purchase the space for $10 million?
Excellent. Valerie?
I think David and I are probably going to tag team on this some. So, with any kind of purchase, now I don't know if I should look at Caleb or at the camera, but I'll look at the camera, but I'm talking to you too. So with any kind of acquisition or purchase, there's the general operating costs, and then there's the actual purchase price. So first I'll address the actual operating costs that, when I went through, so Bethany has shared all of their operating costs with us, and when I went through what they have spent running their facility over in 19 and 20, and I looked at 2018. 20 was obviously kind of an off year, but their operating costs for the facility are essentially equivalent to what it will cost us to run the facility. I mean, what we are spending right now, what we currently spend between House of Blues. We have a small office space, we pay for parking. There's a lot of things kind of behind the scenes. We pay for storage. So from that perspective, I feel really great about it. And then from the perspective of actually the actual purchase, I feel like David addressed that in his remarks earlier, but I think it's just that the $107,000, so the interest will be about just slightly over $100,000 each year that we'll be paying for the next 12 years. And then there's the $10 million at the end of the purchase. And I think he added, that there's several different options of what we can do with that in 12 years. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, just to point out that part of what's happening here is a gift from Bethany. I mean, we're getting a significant, the way it would play out on our books is a significant asset would sit on our balance sheet that any bank would look at to say, like, we are all of a sudden now in the net positive overnight in a way that this church never was, frankly, since we began. And that balance sheet then gets incredibly strong, in which we could go later to a bank in 12 years and be able to get financing to be able to have, frankly, it's a small loan relative to the value of the property that given the strength of that balance sheet that we could go do. So I feel 100% confident that that's not going to be an issue. And frankly, when you apply it to things we talked about at the beginning, which is what are our alternatives, they all are more expensive than maybe people think. And so that's kind of how, at the end of the day, when you weigh the alternatives, this is by far the best outcome financially, just speaking financially, because literally we're getting a significant gift that's going to sit on our balance sheet. Because if the property's worth 30 and we're paying 10 in 12 years, to me that math is pretty.
And it was
self-evident.
also interesting when we ran different lease scenarios. Those would actually cost us more annually from an operating basis than this will. So, I mean, it's my hope that the Lord will use this opportunity for us to grow and that we will be able to raise that money in 12 years. But we have a lot of options if that's not possible, as David mentioned.
Thanks, Valerie and David and Caleb. Elise, will you read a question that's been texted in?
Sure. Another question that's been texted in is, I've loved being at House of Blues and Axelrad because it feels like a safe place for people who aren't used to going to church, have had a bad experience with church, or who struggle to believe. So will going to a traditional building change that?
Thank you. Yes, this is a question I've heard from a couple of people, and I just want to speak from the heart here. This is what City Church is all about. It is something I am deeply passionate about. When we started City Church, one of the convictions was Houston doesn't need another church just for churched people. City Church exists in great part to be outward facing, to be a church that privileges those who aren't comfortable going to a church, who've been injured by the church or by Christians, a space where people feel respected with their questions of unbelief, questions of doubt. And so this is going to remain absolutely central to who we are. I think that the Bethany location is going to give us even a greater opportunity to host events that welcome in the city so that we can begin to dialogue on a greater level on the intersection between faith and culture, faith and unbelief, and faith and justice. So many areas that can be explored because of this 24/7 ministry center that we've just frankly had many limitations. The fact that it's a traditional church is something that we will spend a lot of time thinking about, but I know it's something also, David, you and I have talked about, that there are great examples in cities throughout the world of more traditional church buildings where the aesthetic is a little bit more traditional, but there are churches that are incredibly effective at reaching a more secular, irreligious population. You've spoken to me about a church in London. I certainly know about churches in New York City that are that way as well. And so we will be listening to you, and we'll be listening to churches who are already doing this well.
Yeah, just add one thing. I mean, I have seen this in London play out, and I think for those that are struggling with this one point, there are just some great examples, as you said. Also New York. I mean, it's two great cities, London and New York, where they have done this very well, and I think some great examples that we can follow in that. So this is a little bit of if you haven't seen it, trust us, but we have seen this play out very well, and frankly, some more difficult cities, London and New York being those. So,
yep. Exactly. Okay, Elise, do you have another question for us?
Yes. What are the greatest features of this property?
What are the greatest features of this property? Valerie, do you want to add something there, and then I'll
Yes,
go.
yeah, I'll add something. I'm not sure this is, greatest is always a hard word to answer. It's one of those words that trips me up. So I'm just going to say one of the great features of this property is the opportunity for our kids and youth. That's been a particular ministry area that has just been hard to, I would say, it's been hard for it to flourish in our current situation. And I actually had asked Jennifer Welch, who many of you all know, who's led in both those areas, her thoughts, and she said, while we've gotten by, and we've done more than get by, but the opportunity to have kids spaces, youth spaces, she was like, I just get so excited about how that can be kind of a game changer. And then, I just also think that depending on the types of spaces we we create, I get most excited. I think the greatest feature is that the central location and its ability to draw people into a place like a coffee house or something like that.
Thank you, David.
I just say, well, yeah, I mean, I think what gets me excited is location. But I think when I think about Houston in 20 years, this is going to be a different city. And I think about how it's almost like an impressionist painting you can have in your mind for how the city's going to look in 20 years. But I think this location, just drop a pin on this location and draw a circle around it. And you think about all the people that are moving in from all over the world, and they're going to make this city their own. And it's just it is a strategic location from that perspective when you look at the radius around it and the impact it can have on that. And so I'm just excited for that.
Yes, me too. Central location. It'll give us a space to continue to be this urban church with urban sensibilities that in numerous ways we're not able to now because we don't have our own facility, be able to execute on what I believe is a beautiful mission of bringing beauty into broken places. I think our time is up. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. If you did not already receive a document that we put together, an FAQ document, you can access that by contacting us at info@citychurch.org, and we'll get it to you. And ask you to please be praying for this. As we've been praying for this for a long time, please join us now in praying for this. And again, feel free to reach out to us to ask further questions. And if you want to get together and visit, we'd be more than happy to do so. Let me close our time in a word of prayer now. Our Father, thank you so much that you have faithfully cared for us over these last nearly 6 years through all sorts of adversity, not the least of which we've experienced over the last year. We thank you that, Jesus, you are the one who is building your church. And Lord, we place this opportunity into your hands and ask for your will to be done on earth, here in Houston, as it is in heaven, for your glory and for the well-being of those who don't already believe that through City Church, over the next 20 plus years, they might come to know and love Jesus Christ. And we thank you, commit all this to you, in Jesus' name. Amen.